Hi, I'm Oliver Codd, and today I'm going to walk you through LA Modern Percussion, a new cinematic drum library by Ollie in collaboration with Performance Samples and the legendary scoring mixer Alan Meyerson. Inspired by the aggressive percussion sounds of Alan's most iconic work, we brought four of LA's finest percussionists to Warner Brothers Eastwood stage and recorded a huge selection of instruments, both as ensembles and soloists. From the mic setup to the final mixes, Alan followed his process exactly as he would if he were recording his next big blockbuster film score, and we worked meticulously to ensure that his sound would faithfully translate when played in the form of a sample library. Let's take a listen to a short in-context example of the library. So LA Modern Percussion is organized by drum type. You'll see a bunch of different folders with the drum names on them. And then within each folder structure are the various patch types. So let's just jump in. I'm going to go through all the patches, as many drums as possible, and just show you how I like to work with the library. I think that's the most transparent way to show you guys LA Modern Percussion. All right, so all of the drum types have these dynamic hits, which are essentially 25 dynamics on average and 0 round robin. So you'll see we've got 3 mapping styles here. The first has the dynamics mapped across the keyboard, and then we have 2 velocity sensitive mapping styles. So let's check those out. So they sound the same, but they're a little bit different. This first style here has all of the dynamics mapped to both keys. So left key and right key both have 25 dynamics. This last mapping style has half of the dynamics on the left key and half on the right. So layers 1, 3, 5, etc. on the left, and 2, 4, 6, 8, etc. on the right. And what this does is it essentially just allows you to play things in on the fly without having to run into the issue of triggering the same sample twice in a row. So I like that. Cool. Let's check out some more patches. So you'll notice that right out of the box, the sound is very kind of tame and organic. It's clear, but it's very natural. It's not hyped with a ton of processing. And the reason this is because we actually had Alan take his mixing to the point where he was applying a certain process globally across all of the drums. So this really included things like phase alignment, maybe some EQ sweetening, overall levels. But at the point where he stopped covering that kind of overall process and took it into a more creative turn, that's when we decided to approach the mixing a little bit differently. So he didn't actually bake in those effects. And the reason we did this is because we wanted to have Contact take over part of the processing load so that we could essentially give users a variety of mixes without having to print out multiple versions of the WAV files. So let's take a look at some of these presets. Excuse my horrible playing. So there are a couple advantages to this. Something we kind of were discussing early on was that Alan would mix a piece of music very differently than he would a sample library, for obvious reasons. But we wanted to get the sound as close to how it would sound as if he were mixing for music. But the issue is that he would take a given percussion sound and mix it a million different ways depending on the context or the piece of music or the genre, on and on and on. You know, he'll mix, say, a daiko, roomy in one case, and maybe incredibly close in another. It all depends on what role that drum is playing in the production. And so we felt that if he just kind of provided one mix per drum, we weren't really going to be getting his sound. We're getting, you know, a kind of small fragment of his sound. But we wanted to try and take things a little bit further than has been done in other percussion libraries. Okay, let's check out some more patches or some more sounds. Very close and aggressive mix. So there's another reason why we wanted to rely on Contact for some of the processing. And this is because we realized that dynamic effects respond very differently to samples, individual samples, than they do to pieces of music. And this is because when you play a piece of music into a compressor or a transient designer or even saturation, it's responding to the overlap in decays and the harmonic buildup and all of the kind of overlap you get between the notes. And this is part of what contributes to its like gluing-esque effect. But when you just drive one note, one sample into a compressor at a time, you don't get any of that. And so we felt that if we were going to bake in the dynamic effects to the individual samples, it wasn't actually translating the same way as you hear it in the music. So by using Contact to cover compression, saturation, and transient design, we actually got a lot closer to how his mixes would sound if he were doing music. And this is exactly what we wanted. So, you know, two real advantages here. The one is that we have a kind of unlimited amount of variety as far as what we can provide for you guys as mixes, in terms of mixes, pardon. And it essentially gets us closer to his sound anyway. So it's kind of a win-win situation here. So you'll notice that Alan's sound is inherently very wide. That's his approach in percussion, especially for this library. He wanted his sound to be very stereo. But if you want to create your own mix from scratch, we provided the raw mics as well. Now you'll notice that these are actually processed because by default, all of the mics are going to be routed to their like buses. So we've got a stereo bus, which covers all of the microphones, just like your DAW. We've got a close bus, a mid-room bus, a room bus, and an ambient bus. So if you listen to those ambient mics again, you can hear they're being compressed a lot. And this is something that Alan actually loves to do, is squash the ambience, because what it does essentially is it gives you more of a tail and less of that kind of early reflection, which actually sounds really nice when layered in with the rest of the drums. So if you take off the compressor, put it back on, you can hear it kind of brings out the decay, which is really nice when you layer it with if you want some of the more roomy sound. Anyway, it's just really cool the way we've set this up. Everything is essentially modeled after his chain. So Alan built a template for us that we were able to use and model how we built LA Modern Percussion around. So the processing that we're applying to the ambient mics, for example, is very similar to how he set it up for a lot of the drums in his template. So, you know, from the mixes to the individual mics, everything's kind of modeled around his setup, which I think is super cool. Let's take a look at some more dynamic hits, and then we'll dive into some of the other patch types. Let's try processed room. Okay, so just to clarify, the numbers in the presets represent the level of processing. So close 1 is going to be lightly processed. Close 4 is going to be very processed. So close, mid, room, those explain the dimension, you know, how close or far. And then the numbers represent how aggressively they're processed. Now, inherently, when you're doing extreme compression and saturation, it's going to bring out some of the room noise and stuff like that. And in lower drums, it'll bring out some of the decay. And so we've created a modulation page which gives users the ability to really control not only the traditional AHDSR, where you're able to control the kind of global decay, but with a high-pass filter and a low-pass filter also routed to AHDSR, you can be specific about frequency decay. So if you want to just kind of cut the high end out after a while, you can do that with the low-pass filter. So let's just take a listen to that. Right now the low pass is all the way up, but if you pull it down, you hear how it cleans up that high end? Yeah, it's cool. And we actually prefer to work this way rather than getting too crazy with noise reduction. Sometimes I actually like to have room noise, and I feel that it can compromise the recordings if you go too crazy with it. So this is for us the preferred method. Super clean. And then we also included a note interruption control, which is similar to AHDSR, except that it's just automating the process. So it will cut the decay off when the next note is triggered. So that'll make things super clean, and it's very useful. So let's take a look at some of the other patch types now. Actually, one thing I want to go over real quick. So, yeah, before we go on, one thing I just wanted to mention about dynamic hits and something that I think is particularly useful about them is the fact that without round robin, you get to be extremely specific about which samples you're triggering. You know, if I play this, if I program that in, it's going to play that exact same phrase every single time. There's never going to be a difference. And this can be extremely useful when you want to be specific about things like the way a certain thing is accented. You know, if you have round robin, sometimes the note doesn't hit the exact same way every time it cycles through, which can be really frustrating. You lose the aggressiveness. And likewise with a groove, sometimes a round robin will trigger a sample that just doesn't quite give you the same movement that you got the first time you played it in, which can be super frustrating. And from a mixing perspective, a lot of mixers will refuse to actually work with MIDI. You know, they'll have to print out the percussion tracks for that very reason, because every time it's playing through, it's a little bit different. And when you need to be very calculated about mixing decisions, it can be impossible if it changes every time. So that's just one of the advantages of the dynamic hits. Another is the fact that because they actually have so few samples, they're very low in CPU usage. You know, they're not streaming thousands of samples at a time, which makes them super useful for stacking. And that's a big aspect of Ollie Modern Percussion, is this like produced sound that we showed in the design patches. And so the design, or the dynamic hits allow us to stack tons and tons of drums and process them differently and pull up all sorts of mics and all this stuff without essentially blowing up our machine. So they're really an integral part of the library. So anyway, those are the dynamic hits. Let's proceed and check out some of the traditional hits and rolls. Let's see, we'll do Taiko Ensemble. All right, let's check out some of the mixes. All right, cool. So traditional hits and rolls, you're all familiar with. This is the kind of most common way of sampling percussion. We sampled 12 dynamics and up to 7 round robin. So we got a lot of detail with these. And something I want to mention is that we didn't get the traditional hits and rolls for all of the drums. We just got them for the major ensembles. So most of the solos don't have traditional hits and rolls. That being said, I want to take this moment to demonstrate the advantage to using the raw mics, especially for the ensembles. So let me go over these real quick. STLF, STRF. This is stage left front, stage right front, stage left rear, stage right rear. And essentially these are the various close mic arrays that each player had in front of them. So they're an identical set of close mics in front of each individual player. So let's take a listen to how these sound. All right, so what's super cool about this is that each player is extremely isolated. It blew me away when I pulled this up. Is like essentially within the ensembles, you kind of have access to the soloists, and you know, which is cool if you want to have a solo drum. But what's even more cool is the ability then to layer these and really kind of fine-tune the tone you want. You know, okay, maybe we're going to be using some darker drums there, so let's just drive the EQ up. Right? Maybe no, I want to bring in this guy. Or maybe I don't want that guy at all. And I want a more narrow sound. See what I'm saying? Just from the mics here, it's like we've created an entirely new drum. Let's pull down the, yeah, you know what I'm getting at here? You know, what if we want to pitch things down, create this just kind of like that, but then we get some low mid stuff going on. So let's just go back to the master bus and pull out some of the low mids and really boost the highs, maybe even boost the lows. Yeah. But maybe now we're getting a little bit of too much overlap in the decays, especially now that we pitched it down. So let's try the note interruption. So yeah, now I've got a sound that I like. I can save this as a preset easily, just like this. So massive taiko ensemble. Boom. It's a preset. I can load it back up anytime. Now, if I were to create a multi, you know, I'm designing drums this way instead. Let's just pull up, say, the tom ensemble. Traditional hits and rolls, if I can find them. Just want the close mics here. Let's try this overhead mix. With the toms, kind of drums that have a lot of high-end information, I find that using the overheads, which are inherently dark, add this really kind of cool, totally different tone, which I like. Pull out some of that frequency. A bit loud. Alright, so say I like this sound, then I go and just save it as a multi. You know? It's that simple. And this is really how the library is meant to be used, guys. It's like, yeah, we've got all these awesome individual recordings, but the kind of fun starts when you get into this crazy processing and stacking and all that stuff. And I really like to use Contact's kind of mixer down here. If I want to apply any effects to all of the drums at once, you know, I could pull up limiter, for example. Or, you know, we could get crazy with EQ. Right? Now you can hear the tom ensembles, you know, you can hear the room noise. Cleaned up a lot. So anyway, that's how I use the library. Let's proceed. Let's check out a couple more of the traditional hits and rolls. We didn't just get big drums. We got things like shakers and a ton of different mallet and brush types as well. Let's do try some of the mics. See that? totally different drum or shaker. I think percussion libraries, something like this, are the exception to it being acceptable to have a ridiculous amount of mics. Like, there's a lot of controversy sometimes about how many mics do you really need, and I think for orchestral instruments like strings and things like that, you probably don't need that many mics. There's kind of a traditional way of recording stuff, and really you don't need to deviate so far from that. But with percussion and modern percussion, where you're kind of somehow overlapping between sound design and there's production, having the ability to craft all these different microphones, it's awesome. Maybe the overheads, much darker sound. So something I haven't mentioned yet is the align control. And you probably won't notice it in the shakers here because they're not very transient. But something that Alan likes to do is line the close mics up with the room mics. And this is essentially because in a room, the distance between the room mics and the drum and the close mics and the drum is very different. So you get this very small flamming effect sometimes. And if you really need the percussion to be driving and have a very focused transient, that can become a problem, especially when you've got stacks of different drum types that have various delays in the room compared to the close. So having the ability to lock that all together creates a much punchier effect. And it's something he does all the time, and we've incorporated it into the library, which is really cool. And you can set it anywhere in between locked and its natural position. So sometimes it's actually interesting to experiment with how it sounds somewhere in between. But usually I will either keep it natural or locked, depending on the drum and the effect. That's very different. Cool. All right, so let's take a look at some of the advanced controls here. We've got transpose, which is pretty self-explanatory. Velocity. At neutral position, you're getting the natural velocity. All the way down, you're getting no change in velocity. So essentially, the quietest notes are the same volume as the loudest notes. Kind of compression, really. And then 100%, you're exaggerating the dynamics. By the way, on a Mac, a command click will put your controls back to neutral. Response is similar, except that it's controlling MIDI information. So all the way down, it's only going to let you trigger the lowest velocities. And then all the way up, you can access all the velocities. So sometimes if you really want to just focus on a kind of quiet passage, having the full velocity range of the keyboard, only triggering those low notes, can be quite useful. Fine tune is just pitch. And then pitch wheel will determine how drastic the pitch shift is from the pitch wheel. I usually keep that at 1. Sometimes it's cool to actually automate very small pitch changes to just give a little bit more variation or life or whatever. For the traditional hits and rolls, we have a round robin lock feature. If you want to lock to one round robin, this can be useful for sound design and stuff like that if you want to just trigger one hit. And then dynamic lock does the same. It'll just stick to one dynamic layer. And then offset controls the offset time. So by default, we've got these at 40 milliseconds, but you can change that if you want to. If you go all the way to 0 milliseconds, you're going to lose a little bit of the transient, which can be fine if you prefer that for playing it in, because it's more responsive. But I would highly recommend putting it back to default after the fact and then adjusting it within your DAW to match. Okay? All right, let's check out some of the fills patches. All right, so with the fills, we essentially have phrases. I don't want to say loops because they're a little bit more calculated than loops, but phrases that were meant to be combined, spread across the keyboard, which you can combine to make your own grooves. And what's cool is that you can customize each phrase with key switches. So if you want to just trigger a certain part of it, so here's how it is by default. See what I mean? And then it'll save that information. So if you want to do you get the idea. But this can be incredibly useful and makes it very flexible when you want to create your own grooves. So these are all locked to the tempo. In other words, they're tempo synced. Okay. So we got a lot of these. Let's try. Okay, this is what I was looking for. Let's pull up one of the mixes. You know, these can be great for making grooves, but they're also great for just making, like, statements at the beginning of a track, you know. Very just, like, you know, great way to start a piece of music with lots of energy. You see? That easy. Now we've got a 7/8 groove. Anyway, I'm just playing this in, but when you program it in, you can get some really awesome results. You know, sometimes I'll create a track and I'll create the groove starting with these. Sometimes I'll create a groove with the, normal hits, but just use these to add energy and humanize the tracks a bit. But either way, I highly recommend that you check these out. Check out some of the mics. If you do decide to pitch down the patch, they will stay in tempo, which is cool if you want to do any layering. So say we take this one and just do some of the close mics. Sounds a little bit woolly. So let's pull out some of the low mids and maybe boost some of aggressive. Let's check out the overheads, see how they sound on their own. Very dark. When you pull up the high end, they just have a unique sound. I like that. You kind of hear the skin more. Cool. So let's just check out a couple more of those, and then we'll move on to the improvs. And you. Tom Ensemble. So that's getting a little bit ridiculous, but just illustrating a point. Just dial that down a bit. Let's try that overhead mix. Super cool. I love these. Um, in my productions, I'd oftentimes rely on the kind of traditional sampling approach and feel that things were a little bit static. They just didn't have any life. And that left me with the option of, okay, searching for some loop that kind of went with the groove, which is always a nightmare. I'd search for hours looking for a groove that kind of works. Or I could do something like record shakers or a frame drum or whatever in my own studio, which works really well, except for the fact that there's this disconnect in the recordings. You record something in a beautiful live room like Warner Brothers, and then you record a drum in a living room or a bedroom or wherever your studio is at home. It doesn't fit well. So there's this kind of separation between the sounds, and you don't get the largeness. So having the ability to not only have these performances, but have performances and be able to customize them, and they're all recorded in the same room with the same drums. It's awesome, guys. This is a huge, huge help to my own personal workflow and kind of quest to create more realistic, more energetic mock-ups. So anyway, the fills patches come in different speeds. Most of them have 120 BPM and 170 BPM. Some are playing double time, and a few of them are playing 150. So we've got a bunch of these patches. So I'm not going to get through them all, obviously, but let's proceed. Okay. All right, so the improvs are similar, but a little bit different. Rather than having the players play specific patterns that were designed to be combined, this time around we just had them improvise. We had the section leader start jamming, and then the other players would kind of groove along with him. And the benefit of this is that when musicians start to improvise, you get these kind of little ornaments and flavors of their actual identity as musicians. And these are kind of the things that I feel make good music magical. It's that individuality, and having the ability to just kind of maybe weave some of this stuff into your own mock-ups. It can add a new life to your sound. The way we did these is we spread them out on the keyboard, or essentially it's one performance, and the keys will trigger different points of that performance. So you can go and trigger different points to combine them and make new sounds. Uh-oh, excuse me. Let's check out one of the presets. Maybe we'll do a very close and aggressive one for these. Those are pretty pretty wild. And again, I'm just playing this in live, but if you're more calculated about the decisions you're making, you can have a lot of control over what they're playing, which is really cool. Let's just check out the mics. Nice. That's cool sounding. So maybe I want the room mics to be just super dark, and then the close mics super bright. All right, guys, so you can see I'm going a little bit crazy, but what I love about the workflow of this is that I can just so easily start dialing in different settings for the mic buses, and this is something that mixers will do, and it's something that I wouldn't do if I had to output the mics into my DAW and go in and process each kind of mic output differently. Maybe for a track or two, but if you've got 20 tracks of percussion, it's going to get old really fast, and you're going to just destroy your workflow. So having the ability to kind of tap into these more advanced percussion mixing techniques easily and efficiently, all from within Contact. This is all in one track. It's a lifesaver. It's amazing, and I feel like it's kind of I don't know, opened up a lot of doors for me in terms of being creative with my percussion sounds, and I hope it does the same for you. So let's keep going. There's more to look at here. Let's check out some of the flams. So, things like flams you can program in, and they sound good, but again, with the kind of performance aspect, you don't get the same level of edge and aggression and energy as you do if they do it for real. And it's so easy to record something like this. It doesn't take that much time, and it can really add a lot of energy to your track. So we got a lot of flams. We got them in multiple dynamics and multiple round robin. Load up a preset. It's getting dirty. We'll turn that off. Let's try classic. So there are 3 different distortion types: classic, enhanced, and drums, with varying degrees of filth. Something I haven't mentioned yet, guys, is if you ever forget the controls, what they do, each page has an info button which will tell you exactly what things are, which can be helpful. Now, if you do want to take the sounds and route them out anyway, you do this from the effects page, which is essentially kind of like a console strip. So you can output them from the arrows here. And also, if you want to change how the individual mics are routed to the buses, say, for example, maybe you want to isolate one of the close mics out of the close mic stem, you can move that to another bus. So maybe I'll put that one in the mid room or wherever you want, but you can control that. It's not locked in. So that's nice. Also, stereo invert. Pan. So that covers a lot of the UI, I think. We got flams for most of the major ensembles. So we got tom flams 2. Cool. Those are pretty straightforward. Finally, let's take a look at the phrase end hits. These are Jasper's favorite. And maybe one of these. So essentially what these are hits that were pulled out of live performances. And there's a couple advantages to them. They have a certain connectivity that you don't get from the other hits. And I think it's this like little bit of movement in before, right before the note that you can hear. You know what I mean? Gives them just a little bit more life for some reason. And they're also really good for sound design, I've found, because that little bit of a whoosh in there, when you pitch them down, is quite useful for creating those kind of rumps or whooshes, whatever you want to. We did a lot of that in the multis. We did sound design as well as ensembles and stuff. So let's take a look at another phrase end hit here. Let's see if phrase end hits. By the way, guys, sometimes if you hear a little bit too much distortion when I load up a preset, it's just that the effects are responding a little bit differently to louder sounds or whatever. You can dial that back if need be, but it's not inherent in the recordings, just to clarify. So the thing with phrase end hits too is when the players were playing real performances, they always just hit the drum louder. It's like, it doesn't matter how hard you tell them to hit the drum when they're doing one note at a time, they just don't quite get to that same level as they do as if they're jamming out. So being able to kind of pull those out and inject them back into your mock-ups if you really need it to smack, they're great. All right, what have we not covered yet? Well, I think we covered a lot of the territory here. I just want to go over some of the multis again. Check out some of these. I think I mentioned this earlier, but something that is really exciting to me is the idea that we built the library to do this, and it gives us the ability to expand and expand and expand upon the foundations that we've created. So what we're going to be doing in the future is putting out a lot of these designed hits patches, or they're multis, but I like to consider them more of like a design patch. So we'll be expanding upon this idea and putting out packs where we have new sounds coming out all the time. It's kind of like if you think of a synthesizer, they give you the building blocks to create your own sounds, and then people go and make their own patches, and there's kind of an unlimited number of creative options. We're going to be doing that with LA Modern Percussion, and I think it's just cool because I'm not really familiar with any other library, at least a percussion library, that is able to do this. So let's just keep checking out some of these. We made a lot, and a lot of these are very experimental. Like, we were learning how to go about doing this as we worked. So, and there's a lot of different composers who are working on these. So you're going to get a wide variety of sounds and styles and the way they're built and all this stuff. But definitely check them out. Use them as inspiration of how to use the library. They can be super helpful just for quick writing. Some of them are meant to just be simple. They're not all crazy. And you'll see we've got these looseness and random velocity controls on the dynamic hits. And this essentially just allows us to humanize within contact. So random velocity will randomize the velocity. It's kind of self-explanatory, and looseness will make them more loose. So it's cool. Bit aggressive. So here's an example where we've got the mod wheel controlling the kind of hi-hat thing. So yeah, you can do a lot of things with these guys. They're a lot of fun, and they're huge time savers. You don't want to be building stuff from scratch. We've got a ton of these things just in here ready to go. right, guys. Well, I think that covers it. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. We're going to be putting out a lot of videos this week during the intro period just to kind of focus in on some of these things. Like, I think I'm going to do a specific one on building multis and various kind of things I've learned with working with the mixes and all this stuff. So stay tuned. There's going to be a lot more coming, and I hope you guys enjoy LA Modern Percussion. Thanks.